It's real quick. I just wanted to comment on a video that I was watching called Anarchy versus the State um, with a man named by Jake Diliberto. But just to cut to the chase, if you didn't already see what the video is, it's down in the description. But they're just arguing basically, classic paleoconservatism versus anarchy. And there's just one point that I thought was under-elaborated on in the discussion, and I think that it's really important for people when they're discussing liberty versus statism to ask the question, or actually two questions, but they're related. First, who gets to make the decisions? Ask that question. And then two, how many people does it take to make unwilling participants adhere to a social contract? And these two questions bring about two very important underlying philosophies and hypocrisies when the person who is arguing with you is forced to explain them. First, when you talk about who is the decision maker, that often is the political system, and one has to announce effectively and take a stand saying what makes a liberal democracy, what makes voting valid, what percentage of the population, and then you can delve into the current statistics on how many people can vote. For example, those who can vote are those who are in America, 18 plus, haven't had a record, certain type of conviction, felony, whatever, and then beyond that, who gets to vote, so the amount of people that actually end up voting, and then beyond that, the amount of people who actually get their candidates. So when you get down to those numbers, it comes out to being, something like very, very small, slim percentage of people. And that's, and even then it's the person you get voted in, it may not have been your first choice. So we're talking about a number where the person who's quote-unquote elected is really the true desires of a very small percentage of the population. We're talking like 20% or less. So you put in that perspective, you start to realize, when you realize who are the people getting elected, the decision makers, then suddenly this idealized fantasy of, this perfect, checks and balances, small, limited government doesn't really make any sense. It never has, just because that's the nature of voting. There's always, as long as it's a plurality or a majority or something of that nature, there's always people who are disenfranchised by the nature of the system. And then the second part, which I think is the biggest, most important question to ask, is how many people does it take to force unwilling participants to a social contract? And this question is very foundational. Harkens back to Lysander Spooner and his work at Constitutional Authority, which is in a broader work, No Treason. But when you ask that question, it pretty much is the Occam's razor. Because if somebody is to ask that, and answer that, and they have to, because you have to answer that question in order to validly assert what a government is, because governments all across the world have always existed and come about, even amidst unwilling participants. That's just a fact. Even this one did among loyalists to the crown and people who didn't necessarily like what was going down, but it still, still happened. So what's the number of people? And when you get people to actually announce a number, if you were to do a hypothetical like, well, if there's 10 neighbors and that's all there is on the planet, then as long as 7 make an agreement, the other 3 have to follow it, and they can use force to take their property to make them follow it. It just goes to show the nature of the beast. The nature of the beast is that at the end of the day, these social contracts are fiat, and it's really just enough neighbors have gotten together to force other people into their scheme. Contract of adhesion is what you might say if you're going to use legalese, right? So I thought that was not very well developed or addressed in the video. It was a great video, very interesting to watch, but I think that if those two things were brought out in the discussion, that would totally have creamed what's his name, the Jake Diliberto's premises, or at least made him have to really think. And that's what I do for most people these days, if I'm going to discuss true liberty versus different forms of government, is I just cut down to the core philosophy and get someone to essentially show themselves to be a hypocrite, or B, to admit their true nefarious nature. That is, admit that they don't mind taking other people's property through force. And that's fine. If that's what needs to be done, it needs to be done. At least it makes the person aware of their true beliefs, their core values. And a lot of people aren't, and they're not challenged on these things when they go to school. So maybe I'll elaborate more on those principles later, but I'm saying it way too late as it is. Freaking 4:40 in the morning. Alright, well, take care, guys, and I'll talk to you later.